My name is Avery, and I am 28, a woman who remembers the smell of motor oil from childhood Saturdays with my dad. After years of saving tips and skipping nights out, I finally bought the car I had dreamed about since middle school. Then my parents sold it for my younger sister, calling it the greater good. I swallowed the hurt and made a plan that forced her to repay every cent. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Please like and subscribe. I loved cars long before I could drive. When other kids collected stickers or traded bracelets, I was the teenager who kept a binder full of car magazine clippings and smudged sketches. Dad would take me to the county fairgrounds whenever a weekend car show rolled into town. We would walk the rows at sunrise with coffee and hot chocolate, listen to owners brag about restoration projects, and lean over open hoods like we were peering into living hearts. He taught me the difference between a clean idle and a rough one, and he showed me how patience can be heard in the steady hum of an engine that has been cared for. When I finally turned 16, I did not get a car. Mom said college would matter more than a driveway trophy, and she was not wrong. So I started small. I worked at a diner off the interstate where night shift truckers tipped in crumpled bills that smelled like diesel, and on weekends I stocked shelves at a local hardware store where the paint aisle always carried a sweet tang that clung to my hair. Every paycheck, I split my money into what I called my 3 jars. One for school supplies and unexpected problems, one for a tiny emergency cushion, and one for the dream that kept me moving no matter how tired I felt. That last jar I labeled Freedom and taped a photo to it that I had printed from an online listing of the model I adored. Years folded into one another. I learned to cook simple meals so I would not spend at restaurants. I stayed in when friends chased concerts, and I walked to work when buses ran late to keep rideshare costs down. It was not glamorous. It was slow and steady, like turning a stubborn bolt until it finally gives. When I finished college and landed a decent job at a marketing firm, the dream jar became a real savings account that I checked with the reverence of a pilgrim. I still remember the morning I found the exact car. The listing had clear photos under a cotton sky, the paint a deep color that looked almost wet, the interior spotless, the mileage believable, the service records scanned in tidy rows. The seller had a modest description and an address only a short drive away. I printed the ad, circled the price, and closed my eyes in the break room to breathe as if I were about to sing on a stage. The test drive felt like a quiet vow. The steering responded like it had known me for years. The engine note settled into a tone that made my throat sting. The good kind of ache that tells you something dear has arrived. I negotiated with a calm voice, planned the paperwork, and handed over money that represented late nights, early mornings, and every small choice I had made in favor of a larger future. When I eased the car home, Dad stood on the stoop and clapped once like a coach after a clean finish. Mom smiled when she saw the safety features. My younger sister Leah rolled her eyes, then asked for a ride to meet friends. The first months were a ceremony of ordinary happiness. I kept the car clean, I changed the oil on time, and I learned the small rhythm of its brakes. I drove the long way to work because the long way had a shady stretch by the lake where the road rose and fell like a sigh. I called Dad after the first solo road trip and told him about the highway sunrise, and he laughed and said he could hear the grin in my voice. That car was not just a car. It was the physical proof that patience works, that discipline can build a dream from small pebbles, and that a girl can love machinery and still be tender about it. I slept well for the first time in years. Leah and I have never been the same kind of daughters. She is 2 years younger, bright and lively, fluent in social storms, and our parents often cushioned her falls. I do not say this with bitterness so much as clarity that arrives after many holidays. When I broke a glass as a kid, I had to sweep the floor and pay from my allowance. When Leah cracked a window with an accidental toss of a shoe, Dad said it was only a window, and Mom ordered takeout to cheer her up. That sort of pattern, soft and subtle, shapes a house like wind shapes a tree line. Once the car settled into our lives, Leah started to orbit it. She would run her fingers over the door and say it looked like it belonged to someone famous. She would bring up errands with precise timing, asking for quick rides that were never quick. At first, it felt almost sweet that she wanted to be near me more. I figured maybe the car was a bridge in a sisterhood that had always struggled to find a comfortable bench. But then she began to make little comments that landed in my chest with a tiny sting. She would say families should share big things. She would sigh about how hard it was to take public transportation to campus when her schedule was packed. She would admire the interior, then joke that I worked from home enough that the car was wasted. These remarks arrived with a smile, then with a longer look that asked me to fill the silence with agreement. I tried to be firm and fair. I told her I would drive her sometimes, but that the car was my property and my responsibility. I explained how the insurance worked and how I could not risk premiums skyrocketing. I used calm words and looked for calm answers. Our parents began to echo Leah without saying they were echoing her. Mom would bring up fairness in the kitchen while she chopped onions, and Dad would muse about how families leverage resources for the whole team. It felt like a newsletter campaign had launched at home, each of them using different language to pitch the same idea. I said no politely and repeatedly. My yeses had boundaries. I said yes to occasional rides and no to lending the keys overnight. I said yes to her being present and no to her acting as if the car already belonged to the house. I thought clear boundaries would be enough. I thought we all understood that the line was there for a reason. The day it happened began gently. The weather was clear and kind. I had a mid-morning meeting and a plan to visit Dad afterward with a bag of donuts from his favorite shop. I left home early, made the meeting, and took a rideshare back because I wanted to pick up the car for the drive across town. When I turned onto our street, I felt that strange tug you feel when a light has gone off somewhere. The driveway was empty. It was not the pleasant empty of a family out exploring. It was a hollow empty, like a tooth missing in a smile. I checked the curb. I checked the garage. I checked my pocket for the keys, because maybe I had left them on the coffee table. The keys were there. My stomach tightened the way it does when you miss a step on a staircase. I walked inside with my pulse climbing. Mom sat at the table with a neat stack of documents as if the house had been waiting for a notary. Dad stood near the sink with a face I could not read quickly. Leah was scrolling on her phone, her expression too calm. Mom told me to sit. She said there had been a decision. The words that followed felt like a cold wind blown slowly over wet clothes. They had sold my car. The buyer had been a friend of a colleague. The price had been fair in their view. The money had already been wired to assist Leah with tuition costs, housing needs, and what Mom called a few urgent expenses. Mom said it was a family decision for the greater good. Dad said he hated how it looked, but that life sometimes demands sacrifice. Leah did not look up for several seconds. Then she nodded, as if bored, and said this would all settle down. I did not yell. Shock does not always arrive loud. It can arrive like a heavy stone dropped into a lake, the ripples moving outward with strangely methodical grace. I asked how they could sell something that was not theirs. Mom said the household name was on a form for insurance and that the car had been parked at home and that everyone had benefited. I told her those facts did not translate into ownership. Dad repeated the line about me being young and able to buy another. Leah raised an eyebrow and called me dramatic. The conversation dissolved into a string of phrases that will never leave my memory. We are a family. You should understand that education comes first. This is your chance to show maturity. You do not need a fancy car to prove your worth. Every argument had a coat of virtue on it, a polite perfume to mask the fact that they had taken something I had earned. When I asked for the bill of sale and the precise amount, Mom slid the papers across the table, but kept her fingers on the edge as if she could stop time if she pressed hard enough. That small resistance told me everything about the respect that had been missing. I went to my room and sat on the floor because sitting on the bed felt too generous. My hands shook without drama. I stared at the blank space on the driveway through the window and tried to remember that I was not a child. I could have screamed. Instead, I listened to my breath until the tide of anger rolled back to reveal the sand underneath. There was a plan buried there. It would take patience and discipline, the same things that had created that car in the first place. I felt tired and strangely clear. I wiped my face with the back of my hand like a mechanic in a garage and stood up. The first week after the sale moved like a slow thunderstorm. I would wake in the night and reach for keys that were not there. My body had learned the weight of them, the small outline that pressed into a pocket or a purse, and now that familiar shape was gone. I kept seeing the car in ordinary places. I saw it gliding past the grocery store. I saw it waiting at a light under the elm trees near the library. Those were phantoms made from habit. The brain is a projector that keeps playing a scene long after the theater has closed. Friends reacted in ways that revealed their own histories. Maya said I should file a claim immediately and take my parents to small claims court without hesitation. She believed in straight lines and fast justice. Jacob said blood is messy and cautioned me to wait, to sit down with a mediator, to choose peace over victory. Our co-worker Claire, who had always been the practical type, pulled me into the break room and said she had a cousin who knew paperwork very well, the kind who could tell me which forms would speak loudest if I did decide to act. At home, the air thickened. Meals slid by with polite sentences that sounded like lines from a dinner scene in a bland play. Dad asked about work. Mom passed the salt. Leah showed up with a new laptop and a fashionable bag and a pair of shoes that clicked too loudly in the hallway. She posted photos from her dorm, where string lights framed her bed, and a tiny rug made the room look like a set for a pleasant commercial. When she complained about a professor, Mom sent a long text packed with heart emojis, and I tried not to think about how far my car money could travel into people who seemed to believe that someone else should fund their comfort. I made lists in a private email that I sent only to myself. One list held feelings, each one named with a clean word. Betrayed, erased, angry, sad. The second list was practical. Copies of the listing I had printed at the beginning. Receipts for maintenance. Dates of registration and inspection. The exact hours I had worked during the months I paid for everything, pulled from an old file I kept because I have always been that kind of person. These lists anchored me when sleep refused to. At work, I moved through duties like a person wading through chest-high water. My manager noticed the change. She asked if I needed a day off. I said no. That routine helped. In the evenings, I walked around the block, counting mailboxes to steady my breathing. I held the reality of two truths in my hands like two wrench handles. I loved my family. My family had harmed me. Holding both truths became an exercise in adult life that I had not expected to practice so soon. By the end of that week, a different feeling arrived beneath the grief. It was not calm, and it was not fury. It was something like resolve, a heavy and grounded sensation that made my spine feel taller. I realized that waiting for them to understand me was another way of handing them the keys again. I could choose to claim my share of dignity. I could choose to ask for what was mine and to make clear what would happen if a household tried to confuse generosity with obligation. The decision did not heal me. It just gave me a map for the next mile. I began on a Sunday morning with the kitchen table cleared and my laptop open. I built a simple ledger. On one side, I listed the purchase price of the car. Then I added taxes and fees, title costs, registration, inspection, and every routine service. I included the cost of the set of tires I had installed before winter, the alignment I had scheduled in spring, and the fee for the independent mechanic who had inspected the car before I bought it. I added insurance premiums in the months I had owned it. I did not pad the numbers. I did not add emotional charges. I wanted a document a judge would trust if it came to that. Next, I created a second page called Terms. I wrote that I expected full repayment because the sale had been unauthorized. I wrote that repayment could be done in monthly installments if a lump sum was impossible. I set a timeline that was realistic enough to be humane, but tight enough to communicate that this was not a gift and not a debate. I added a simple sentence that said, if payments were missed without prior arrangement, I would file in small claims court to recover the balance. Then I printed 3 copies because paper sometimes has more gravity than a screen. When I asked everyone to sit in the living room, the house briefly felt like a jury box. Mom crossed her arms. Dad leaned forward. Leah scrolled and then set her phone down with theatrical patience. I spoke without shaking. I explained that the car had been my legal property and that the sale had been unauthorized. I placed a copy of the ledger in front of each of them. I walked them through the line items, naming each cost with clear dates. I did not tell a story about hurt. I showed a record of facts. Mom said I was being transactional with family. I nodded and said I was bringing clarity because the absence of clarity had caused harm. Dad asked if we could find a compromise that would let this fade. I told him we could find a schedule that honored the amounts listed, and that fading would happen in time if we treated one another with integrity now. Leah laughed, a short sound with no humor in it, and said I would never take my own parents to court. I said I hoped not. Then I slid a photocopy of the small claims court information across the coffee table. The moment was small and huge all at once. I was not threatening. I was promising to protect myself. My voice did not rise. My face did not crumple. Years of being the steady one steadied me again. I said I would no longer cook dinner for the household, no longer run last-minute errands, and no longer provide rides on demand while this was unresolved. I said I would help in emergencies if anyone was in danger, but I would not participate in a routine that called theft a sacrifice. The room grew quiet. Respect is a language some people hear only when it arrives in the grammar of consequence. I gave them a week to consider. Then I went to my room and locked the door because I needed the sanctuary of a wooden barrier that did not talk back. I breathed. I cried without hiding from myself. I texted Maya and thanked her for cheering me toward action. I texted Jacob and told him I had acted without breaking myself. I texted Claire and asked for the cousin contact just in case. Then I opened a fresh document, this one titled Boundaries, where I wrote sentences I would carry into the next season of my life, no matter what they chose. They chose repayment. It did not happen because goodwill rose from a warm place. It happened because my clarity left no shadows to hide inside. Dad called me into the kitchen and said they would commit to a monthly amount that sat within the limits I had set. Mom looked tired and agreed without eye contact. Leah rolled her eyes and said college was already hard, but she would do it because she did not want to listen to me talk about justice forever. I wrote the numbers. I wrote the dates. I wrote the method of payment. Then I drafted a simple agreement that everyone signed with ordinary pens that suddenly looked serious. The first installment arrived on time. It was not a celebration. It was business. I used the money to build a plan that did not twist itself around household weather. I opened a new savings account, one that did not exist on our shared family computer. I met a therapist through a community clinic and told her the story not to pit anyone against anyone, but to untangle the wires inside me so I would not electrocute future relationships with old voltage. She asked good questions. Why had I stayed so long in the belief that saying yes to everything proved I was a decent daughter? Where had I learned to confuse silence with kindness? Those were not questions you answer once. They are questions you carry until the answers change you. Leah felt the repayment almost immediately. The new purchases slowed. She showed up for dinner with less flash, and when she complained about professors, no one chimed in with links to new gadgets. She took a part-time campus job tutoring freshmen in her department. She stopped asking me for rides to late-night gatherings because the gas money she offered was now part of the transfer into my account, and she was not interested in enriching me further. She even texted me once to ask if the next payment could be moved 2 days because a deposit had been delayed. I said yes and charged no penalty. Boundaries and mercy are not enemies when they share a map. Our parents watched the new pattern settle over the house like a different season. Dad apologized first. He did not offer excuses. He said he had wanted to be a fixer and had convinced himself that fixing one child by harming another would still count as virtue. He said he had forgotten that fairness does not mean equal gifts. It means equal regard. Mom followed one evening while washing dishes. She whispered that she had been worried that Leah would fall behind and that her fear had made her foolish. She asked me what she could do to rebuild. I told her the same thing I told myself every morning. Keep your promises. Resist using guilt as currency. Ask, do not assume. The family did not transform into a movie family. We did not have a big speech around a table where everyone cried and then hugged in choreographed relief. The change looked plainer. It looked like Dad returning my mail to my room without opening it first. It looked like Mom knocking before entering. It looked like Leah asking to borrow a cardigan and then folding it and placing it on my chair later that day with a thank you. Trust does not come back in grand gestures. It sneaks home in small, everyday acts that repeat until they are simply who we are. Meanwhile, I built a new rhythm. I purchased a modest used car with a modest price so I could function without delicate logistics. It was not the car I had lost. It did not have that voice. But it did the job, and I kept it clean and maintained because those habits are part of my nature, not rewards for winning. I met new friends through a local community group that fixed up donated bicycles and gave them to kids who needed transportation. Working on chains and gears with volunteers who told stories about their neighborhoods reminded me that some loss can be compost if you let it. I took long drives again, but this time I chose cheap state parks with picnic tables and the sound of wind in the tops of pines. The sky did not change. I did. Months later, when Leah finally made the last payment, she left the envelope on the counter with a note that said she would never forget this lesson. She did not use the word sorry. I did not ask her to. I wrote her a short reply. Thank you for following through. Thank you for taking responsibility. I meant every word. At dinner that night, Dad asked about my work project. Mom asked about the therapy group, and Leah told us about a research opportunity she hoped to earn. Ordinary conversation felt like the most luxurious thing I had experienced all year. I wish I could tell you that the moment the last payment cleared, the bruise inside me vanished. Healing does not obey calendars. The first truth is that I hurt for a long time. The second truth is that I did not let hurt tell the whole story. I moved out into a small apartment near a grocery store that smelled like fresh bread every morning. I kept a cheap table by the window where I wrote budgets and little prayers that looked like to-do lists. I cooked soup in a pot dented by years of use and learned to love the ritual of stirring. I worked, I rested, I saw friends, I said no when no was needed, and I said yes when yes would not harm me. I did not chase a replacement for the dream car. I let the idea of it breathe without trying to pin it down. I turned the energy that had once been devoted to a machine toward the kind of life a car can help a person reach. I volunteered twice a month at that bicycle program and watched kids ride away with massive grins, their legs learning the feel of momentum made with their own bodies. I had coffee with Dad on Sunday mornings and talked about baseball and local news and the taste of good peaches, because not every conversation needs to be a referendum on the past. I sat with Mom on the porch and watched the light fade across the yard. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just listened to the birds and let silence be a sign of truce rather than distance. Forgiveness arrived like weather rather than like a switch. It rolled in on quiet days when I was not thinking about justice at all. I realized I was not checking my account to confirm that Leah had paid. I realized I was not building speeches in my shower about what I would say if a stranger asked me to explain everything from beginning to end. I realized I could drive by a car of the same model and not feel a tidal pull of grief. That realization did not erase what happened. It simply made more room for other stories to live in me. The lesson I share is not that you should always fight or that peace lies in surrender. The lesson is that boundaries built with care are a kind of love. They give people a chance to become who they claim they want to be. They give you a way to stand without shaking. The lesson is that people you trust can make decisions that hurt you deeply, and that you can respond without turning yourself into a mirror of that harm. You can ask for what is yours. You can state clear terms. You can follow through. You can forgive when your heart and your spine both agree it is time. If you are listening today and you see a version of yourself in my story, I hope you know that you are not dramatic for naming harm. You are not cruel for asking for repayment when something of yours has been taken. You are not impossible for needing the people who say they love you to act like it with their deeds. Sometimes the real engine that keeps us going is not horsepower or shiny paint or the thrill of a perfect turn. It is the quiet courage to choose integrity when it would be easier to choose approval. Before we wrap up, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a boundary with family about money or property, and what helped you stand your ground without losing yourself? Share your story in the comments so others know they are not alone. If this helped you or made you think, tap like, hit subscribe, and share this with a friend who might need a nudge toward clarity. Thank you for spending time with me today, and I wish you steadiness and kindness wherever this week takes you.